Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. In this video, I'm going to document another example of how academics and the press create completely imaginary stories. They try to create fear about things which people find important. Like this story from the New York Times ahead of the 2018 Winter Olympics. Of 21 Winter Olympic cities, many may soon be too warm to host the Games. But the 2018 Winter Olympics turned out to be one of the coldest on record. And here was another story about the 2018 Games. Winter Olympics threatened by global warming, but NBC won't acknowledge it. In 2006, Katharine Hayhoe from Texas Tech University predicted the demise of snow in the Sierra Nevada. February 20th, 2006. 46 years ago this month, the world's athletes frolicked in the snow at the 1960 Winter Olympics in Squaw Valley, California. 46 years from now, climate experts say it's doubtful that Northern California's mountains will be able to stage another Winter Games. We've heard the propaganda, now let's look at the actual history of the Winter Olympics. 7 of the first 9 Winter Olympics almost had to be canceled because of warm weather and a lack of snow. Between 1924 and 1964, the only 2 Olympics which had enough snow occurred in 1928 and 1948. The first Winter Olympics was held in 1924 at Chamonix, France. They had almost no ice and very little snow, and the French Olympic Committee had to haul carloads of snow down the mountain. The 1932 Winter Olympics were held at Lake Placid, New York, and they had to be postponed because of warm weather. As you can see, there was very little snow. Skiers were getting injured because of the lack of snow. New York was experiencing record heat, and rain washed away the last vestiges of snow. The entire Atlantic coast was experiencing record temperatures during mid-January 1932. The 1936 Winter Olympics were held in Germany, and a few days before the Games started, rain washed away the last of the snow. February 3rd, 1936. The warm weather jinx which has overshadowed the Winter Olympics since their commencement in 1924 today showed no signs of letting up before the scheduled opening here Thursday. Because of World War II, there was no Olympics in 1940 and 1944, and in 1948 there was plenty of snow at St. Moritz. But the next 4 Olympics in 1952, 1956, 1960, and 1964 all suffered from a severe lack of snow. The 1952 Winter Olympics in Oslo, Norway opened up with very little snow on the ground. And again in 1956, the Winter Olympics in Italy had very little snow on the ground. January 25th, 1956, French ski manager Maurice Martel warned that the downhill event next week will be a race of death if it doesn't snow soon. Then again in 1960, there was no snow on the ground at Squaw Valley, California, just ahead of the Winter Olympics. Rain turned to snow just in time to avert possible disaster at the Winter Olympic Games. Now let's compare history to the fake story which the press wrote 46 years later. Here's what the press was saying in 2006 about the 1960 Olympics. 46 years ago this month, the world's athletes frolicked in the snow at the 1960 Winter Olympic Games in Squaw Valley, California. But what actually happened at Squaw Valley in 1960 is that they were on the ragged edge of disaster because of a lack of snow. And then again in 1964, there was a lack of snow in Innsbruck, Austria, and soldiers had to haul in snow. But since 1964, the Winter Olympics have been doing much better because there's been a significant increase in autumn and winter snow extent. Over the last 60 years, Winter Olympics have had a lot more snow than in the 4 decades prior to that. Now let's take a look at how this fits into the bigger picture of the overall climate scam. In 1990, NASA showed that in the United States, the period from 1920 through 1960 was the warmest 4 decades on record. But NASA has since erased the heat of the first half of the 20th century. In 1999, NASA showed that the United States cooled significantly from 1930 through the end of the 20th century. But they later changed the data to turn this cooling trend into a warming trend. This is the current NASA U.S. temperature graph. They've completely erased the heat from 1920 to 1960. It's not just the United States. The same thing has occurred with northern hemisphere temperatures. This graph was from National Geographic in November 1976. It showed that the period from 1920 to 1960 was very warm. In 1974, the National Center for Atmospheric Research showed the same thing for the whole world. The period from 1920 to 1960 was very warm, but after that Earth turned cool. But NASA has since erased the heat from 1920 to 1960 and now show those years among the coldest on record. In 1989, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration said that most global warming occurred before the year 1919 and that Earth cooled from 1921 to 1979. In 1998, Keith Briffa's temperature reconstruction showed that Earth was very warm from 1920 through 1960, and then the 1970s were much cooler. Michael Mann didn't like this inconvenient data, so he erased it in his wildly fraudulent hockey stick. The erasure of this critically important data was referred to in ClimateGate emails as Mike's nature trick to hide the decline. There's plenty of other evidence that the period from 1920 to 1960 was very warm. In 1923, the glaciers in Glacier National Park were melting so quickly, experts predicted they would be gone before 1950. In 1939, all the glaciers in eastern Greenland were melting very rapidly. It may without exaggeration be said that the glaciers of Greenland, like those in Norway, face the possibility of a catastrophic collapse. The glaciers in Austria retreated very rapidly from the 1920s through the 1950s, and the glaciers in Norway retreated very rapidly during that same time period. Ice doesn't lie, but climate academics do. The disappearance of the warmth from the 1920s to the 1960s did not happen by accident. In this ClimateGate email, we can see that climate academics around the world colluded to erase the heat of the 1940s. They wanted to remove the heat of the 1940s, but they didn't even have an explanation for why they were going to do it. I'm going to finish this up with Katharine Hayhoe, who predicted the demise of snow in the Sierra Nevada. As of today, Squaw Valley, which has been renamed Palisades Tahoe for politically correct reasons, has all-time record snow on the ground for this early in the snow season. It's snowing heavily there today, and they've received almost 400 inches of snow already this season. That's 380 more inches of snow now than they had on this date in 1960 ahead of the Winter Olympics. I'd like to talk this over with Katharine Hayhoe, who the New York Times described as one of the nation's most effective climate communicators, but she won't talk with me or any of my followers. Like just about all people who are profiting off the climate scam, her ideas only exist in an intellectual vacuum. Toto has been pulling back the curtain on scamsters like Katharine Hayhoe and Michael Mann for the past 15 years. You can visit him, Kyrie Caesar, Toki Upala, and the 4 new puppies on the web at realclimatescience.com.